First of all, I want to welcome all of you here to the Milken Institute Asia Summit. So this is session 2. We're just getting into it. I'm Paul Irving, the chairman of our relatively new initiative at the Milken Institute, the Center for the Future of Aging. So we have a really big topic today that crosses as many issues and as many sectors as one can possibly imagine. So consider this kind of in a university environment, a survey course, a course 101, and you'll have the opportunity to speak to the members of our panel as the day moves on, and you see them around and about to ask them more about their own lives and how aging in their worlds is changing things so very significantly. So what I want to do just very, very quickly before I move to our guests is just to give you a general sense. I suspect all of you in the audience know that aging is a remarkable global phenomenon, the product of low birth rates around the world, a culture that is continuing to spread and increasing longevity, the product of medical advances and sanitation and safety around the world, and lives have virtually doubled in the last 150 years. If we looked at a chart, which is always fun to look at, kind of going from the beginning of humanity, you would see kind of a straight line, and then this remarkable spike just in very recent times. Those of us who were ensconced in this world, in this field, think of aging in many respects as we do climate change. It's one of those things that may affect humanity, may affect lives as much as anything that's occurring in the world, maybe as significant as climate change is in the physical world, but it's oftentimes hard to see. So as the water boils very, very slowly with all of us sitting in it, we may not be as aware as we should about the impacts of aging on our society. Let me see slide 15, if I can, for a second, just to give you some perspective. Again, slide 15. On the percentage changes in Asia, and what you can see is 2010 numbers and projected 2040 numbers. This is the percentage of the population projected to be over 60. If we can go to slide 16 now and see this in absolute numbers, what you'll see is really incredible changes in countries other than Japan. Hiroko on my right will talk a little bit about Japan in a moment, and that's only because Japan is already there. Japan, as Hiroko will say, is the front runner, is the canary in the coal mine in global aging, and she'll explain something more about that. Can we go to slide 17 quickly, please? So we all, I think, those of us who are interested in global demography and think of demography as being destiny, understand that Japan is an extraordinarily old society relative to many, and that Germany and a number of other countries around the world are aging very rapidly. We saw the numbers in South Korea. We know the numbers in China, but what we oftentimes don't know is the impact of aging on even countries like the countries in Southeast Asia. So I commend you to take a look at two, just by way of example, Vietnam and Thailand, really remarkably rapid aging. And of course, these countries have very difficult and different circumstances, infrastructure, capacity to address these issues, and those are matters of concern and interest for all of us. Let's move to the next slide quickly, if we can. So the consequences of aging fall into two really big baskets. One big basket is financial security, economic well-being and prosperity, and the other big basket is health. This gives you some sense of just rising healthcare expenditures in major Asian economies. Obviously, this is a charge on growth in those economies, and I would say that this may actually understate cost, because it likely, and I'm looking at my colleague Ross Duvall, who is our chief economist, likely does not fully load the costs of productivity losses, caregiving, and some of the other charges that are affected by healthcare. Let's go to the next slide. Slip quickly, please. Just look at the projected healthcare spending in China, projected to reach $1 trillion by 2020. We all heard in the first panel some optimistic news, I think, long-term about China, understanding that we're in a period of gyration and some instability in the current environment. But the impacts on China of the one-child policy, of a rapidly aging population, really can't be overstated. And again, don't just affect China, but affect all of us in the rest of the world. And by the way, you see these numbers not just in Asia, but you very much see them in Europe. People understand that European countries are aging quickly. In North America, Andre will talk about Canada as our North American representative here. And by the way, in Latin America, when I speak to colleagues in Brazil and Argentina, they talk about the extraordinary explosion of their older populations. So next slide, if we can quickly, then I'm going to go. I just want to give you just a sense of the feeling of people in this region about their ability to deal with their own aging. And so what you can see is the relationship between how long they believe their savings will last and how long they expect to be in retirement. And again, these are in the developed countries, and you can imagine the circumstances may be more problematic in some of the developing countries, the frontier nations. So I want to now move to our guests. I want to start off with Don. I'm going to ask each one of them maybe just to spend 2 or 3 minutes very quickly talking about their own perspectives on this. Obviously, Don overseas is in a leadership position in Pru-Asia and sees this from a kind of multi-country perspective. So, Don, we have a lot of investors, business leaders, and others in the audience. Why should they care about aging?
I think you could. Why should we care? Anybody here getting any younger? So I think personally we have to care. Anybody who's here has parents, which are, if your parents are still here, if your parents aren't here anymore, you've been through a period where you've seen and had to deal with in a family situation the issue of care availability. So I think there's personal reasons. Professional reasons, you alluded to. Why should investors care? Why should anybody who's in business care? So I think we have professional reasons. And then I think as citizens, we have reasons. Because this is, you've pointed out, the two big baskets of issues. But I mean, this is one of the most important phenomena and set of issues facing any country in this region. And I think you need to understand more about it and understand how fundamental it is to every country in the region to really understand what's going on in Asia. Those of us who live in Asia, and we're in 12 markets around the region, almost all of ASEAN and East Asia, North Asia. Everybody in Asia is conscious of this to some degree. But I think people who aren't based in the region don't necessarily understand how key it is to the narrative for the whole region. If we go to what is slide 1, I think, let's just put something in perspective. The narrative on Asia, which we all know, and the reason I guess, made the commitment to Asia, I've been living in the region for 28 out of the last 29 years, okay, is the narrative around the dynamics driving the growth of Asia. And one of the best ways to think about that is what causes the creation of households, and it's largely, historically, been driven by the growth in working populations. And we know that narrative. I mean, just looking, just at the ASEAN statistics, 630 million people, 2.5 trillion of GDP, 90 million people moving into the cities over the next 15 years, another 80 million people by 2030 entering the middle class. That's driven by growth in working population, or at least it accompanies growth in working population. And these statistics show the bubble sizes are based on the increase in working population between 2010 and 2050. And what you see are the red dots, the countries that are still experiencing rapid and continuing growth in working population over that period. And I usually show this chart in 2 clicks. I leave the big red dot of India off in the beginning, and people ask 2 questions. Where's China? Well, if you look closely in the lower right-hand corner, there's a small dot because there's minus growth in working population, which is China. Very large. The scale to the right is what's your total working population. The vertical is how is it growing or not. You see China's minus, and actually it's minus 157 million over this period. Okay? India is plus 361 million. So we see the other countries, it's 52 in Indonesia, 52 million growth in working population. So you can understand the driving force behind the Asian growth, and you can also see the challenges China faces. But what you don't realize, if we go to the next slide, slide 2, is that underneath those countries which are still experiencing this demographic dividend of growing working populations is an even faster growth in the over 65. Now, you and I have different definitions. You had over 60. Since I crossed 60, I've moved it out to 65. Actually,
I've crossed 62. I just appreciate my maturity.
But anyway, so this is a growth in retirement. When we say retirement, we'll come back to that, I hope, in the discussion, because it's a terrible word. Because most of the people that are getting to or crossing 65, even in research that we've recently sponsored, don't plan to actually retire. But in the 65 and over, you see even places like Cambodia or Laos have phenomenal growth rates in working populations, much higher than the countries which we normally think of as the aging countries. We go to the third slide. The question that I think is critical in understanding this narrative is how fast this is happening. If we look at a few Western countries, I think these are roughly representative, and say, how long did it take them to go from being a young country, which some people would define as less than 10% of the population over 65, to being a mature country, meaning more than 20, doubling, more than 20 over 65. The UK, the US, Netherlands have still not reached the 20. But it's projected to take the UK 77 years to get there. And the US, 56 years. So 2 or 3 generations. Now, we all know, if you go to the next slide, that some countries in Asia are aging much faster. But the point is, in the Asian countries we all know are aging, and I would put on that list the ones colored in red there, Japan, Hong Kong, which is not a country, but a market, Korea, Singapore, China, aging very fast, have 1 generation to prepare. What people don't realize is that coming behind are a few countries which are aging just as fast as those, but we think of them as the emerging growth countries. Go to the next slide. That Thailand is actually aging faster than China. That Vietnam is just on the heels of that. So what does that mean? And even if we look at the countries which still have growth in population, by the middle of the century, they're going to be on a track that's faster than the Western countries for aging. What does that mean? Well, it comes down to, if you want to simplify it and why we care, is some of those countries at the top of the chart were able to get reasonably wealthy before they got old. But the question for some of the countries in the second part of the chart, will they be old before they get wealthy? And how do you fund the graying and the growing at the same time? Because you don't have the luxury of saying, okay, let's first develop economically, and then we'll take care of the aging problem, because it's going to be on you before you get to that stage. So this is a really critical issue as we get to the public policy area and the financing area. And we can come back to solutions, I think,
Good.
At some point.
And I want to ask you later whether you think that that's binary, whether graying and growing are necessarily inconsistent. So, Hiroko, you're in many ways representative of the person on this stage who's kind of at the center of the change. Japan has dealt with this in a more significant way than any country in the world, and you're one of the leading scholars in the country on this issue. So tell us about Japan's aging and how Japan's dealing with this.
Okay. Japan is the front runner of aging society in terms of longevity and also the proportion of older persons in the population. And now the average life expectancy of Japanese men is 80 years and 87 years almost, for women. And so we need to prepare to live, 90 years. My mother is 94, My mother-in-law is 95, and my aunt is 100. We live long. And
so we can expect you back as a speaker at the Milken Institute Asia Conference in 2035. That's just
certainly,
checking.
yes. And now 26%, I mean a quarter of the population is age 65 and older. And slide 10, please.
Slide 10?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, this slide shows, I mean, age composition of Japanese, I mean, population in 2005 and 30 and 55. And in the middle one, I mean, in 2030, only 15 years, I mean, from now, the one-third of the population will be 65 and older, and 20% of the total population will be 75 and older. So it's a really drastic increase of people. And but in 1950, just after the World War II, the average life expectancy of Japan is less than 60 years, and only 5% of the population is age 65 and older. So, I mean, in the second half of the 20th century, the life expectancy of Japan extended, 30 years. So we experienced rapid, aging, just as Dan, mentioned. And just as many other Asian countries are now experiencing kind of rapid, population aging. But these, the dramatic or dramatic demographic change presents, the tremendous challenges to us. To both the society and the individual. And at the societal level, the current infrastructure of the society was built when the population was much younger. So, they don't actually meet the needs of highly aged society. So we need to kind of overhaul or redesign the current infrastructure in both hard and soft, like housing and transportation system, but also healthcare system, education system, and employment system, the soft infrastructure. And that's kind of the challenge at the society level. And also at the individual level, we know how to live a life of 50 years. Or 50 or 60 years. Because, the life of 50 or 60 years lasts for many hundred years in Japan. So we know how to live 50 years, a life of 50 years. But we don't really know how to live a full life of 90 years. So, this is a kind of a challenge to the individual. And so this, the demographic change, present, the tremendous, challenges, but also, offer abundant opportunities, both in individual and also business. That's my opinion. Yes.
So I want to come back to opportunities certainly before we end. Andre, so as a pension fund manager, you really have two perspectives on this. One, you have beneficiaries counting on pension payments from you, and two, you're an investor, and you're looking at how aging is affecting companies, sectors, products, services, et cetera. What's the perspective from Canada?
Well, I think we come from a very interesting perspective, as we probably were one of the leaders in terms of seeing the demographic profile affecting pension for beneficiaries. It's clear, and it's hard to put politician and visionary in the same sentence, but clearly the Canadian government in the mid-90s realized that this pay-as-you-go system was unsustainable and decided to make a number of changes. So the aging question really pushes the boundary of policy making, and you need politicians with very strong courage not to push forward that problem, which is, I think, what most of the industrialized countries are doing right now. And at least address the question. And the way it was addressed in Canada was in two ways. First, they decided that they needed to increase the safety cushion, and they did that by making some drastic measure, including increasing the contribution that you put in your public pension from 3% to about 10%. So and I'm not sure you could do that in a lot of countries. You try to do that in France. I love picking on France, but you've riot in the streets for like 6 months. In Canada, people, trust their government and trust that the government is doing the right thing. I've actually embraced those changes. The second measure that the government did is to take that money and trusted independent entities to manage it outside the power of the government to use that money for other purposes, which is very tempting in times of dire economies. And I think that has created what we call the Maple model or the Maple Revolution in terms of the Canadian pension plan being at the forefront as institutional investors. Now, as investor, it obviously has a big impact on us. Younger people tend to be net borrower, older people net savers. And if you think that the global market conditions will have a bigger impact on market trends, and you see the numbers that have been on the previous slides, it is a global issue everywhere. So what is going to be the impact of an aging population on interest rate, probably pushing them down, and at the same time having lower return because people will invest less in equity. So for us, it's a very big issue that we're confronting every day in our investor world, but also always having in mind that we have the beneficiaries of those investments, and how do we provide them the best service possible.
So Jackie, you come at this from an interesting perspective. Your background is very much in the human capital business. You ran Egon Zehnder in Asia before taking on your current role as the CEO of Temasek Trust. So you've found people, you've placed them, and now you're in the process of trying to give some money away to the right things. How did you get interested in aging, and what do you see as kind of the role of Singapore in terms of its leadership and ideas?
Well, I guess I look at aging from coming from it in different ways. From a personal standpoint, just as Don was saying earlier, all of us in this room, we're not getting any younger, and many of us have aging parents. I have been a caregiver for my parents. My father was 90 when he died a few years ago. My mother is 93. And when you have aged parents that you have seen through this, when they're in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you see a sort of a path of how they want to live their life, and you're very intimately engrossed with that. And with aged parents, you always also get involved with other people who have aged parents. So you realize that actually we are all not so different. We are humans, and whether we are, in our 60s, 70s, or 80s, or 90s, we care about some fundamental things. We want to remain independent as much as we can. We don't want to be treated as some, sort of a person who begins not to be able to. Of course, sometimes, you might be physically or otherwise less independent. But generally speaking, we want to be independent. We want to be socially connected to your community, to social networks, to your family, to be in intergenerational kinds of environments, not to be pushed aside to some place where everybody else is old and like yourself, and to feel you have a purpose and you're contributing. All of those things do not diminish as you get older. I realize as you as you personally think about your parents and people that are in your lives, and we are going to be going down that path. What is it that we want for ourselves? So I think that's one part that's quite important for us to be thinking about. The second part is that, as you mentioned, I spent 14 years of my life as a senior partner at Egon Zehnder, where we did a lot of executive recruitment to C-level positions and boards and so on. And my specialization was financial services sector, which I led. I built and led for quite a number of years because I came myself from investment banking. And if I think about financial services, where I spent most of my life, you have highly educated people. I came from an era where the cream of the crop from the best universities went into investment banking and financial services. Everybody are reasonably, pretty well educated, cream of the crop to a degree, sort of somewhat elite, have lots of zeros after their sort of compensation, especially in investment banking. And yet, through the ups and downs, when you have, of course, banking is also, well, financial services is also one of the most volatile as well as ageist sectors. And so people lose their jobs through, a variety of reasons, whether it be recessions or reorganizations or, mergers and so on. And you cannot believe, or maybe you do, how many senior people that I've come across that when they lose their jobs, they're so surprised and they're so traumatized. And often they're traumatized despite the fact that they are technically, compared to the rest of the population, very financially secure, or you would have thought, but not necessarily. Many of them are not, because they live a life that, exceeds their financial means, and suddenly they realize that, they're out of status, out of title, out of identity, out of money, and it's a huge trauma. Now, so imagine, what that looks like for the rest of the population that, are not as privileged as we are in the financial services sector. And so you look at human capital and you think about how important it is to continuously be reflecting and thinking about, your next stage and what are you going to be doing, and how do you keep reinventing yourself. I don't have a word for it, but I would say to invest in your sort of, all of us have to invest in our relevance capital. I mean, human capital is really, really important, as we heard in the other room earlier, it's really, one of the most important things in any economy or any business. We don't think enough about ourselves in terms of our capital and how we keep reinventing. Now, I grew up in a home where, my parents were refugees, immigrants, and they had gone through war, they'd gone through, sort of not having any money. And I remember that, my father always said to us, if you accumulate a lot of material wealth, so what? War or natural disasters or whatever, it can be taken away from you. If you invest in, what's between your ears all the time, if you're constantly, sort of curious and, learning and adapting and reinventing and having this sense of confidence that no matter what happens in your life, you can rebuild and you can be, you'll be fine, then that is a capital that is actually extremely strong. You bring it with you wherever you go, and unless somebody, put a gun to your head and shoot you, they can't take it away from you. So, I feel that the human capital thing, it's really too bad that we think about people working until they're 65. We study, we invest in our studies or whatever, and then we kind of, on this treadmill, we don't think a lot, we don't reflect a lot. And then suddenly, retirement, is ahead of us, and that's an ugly word as far as I'm concerned, because there's no such thing as retirement. Yet it's not like that. Whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, the disruptions that are going to come in your life, a lot of them are going to be out of your control. And increasingly, in our world today, the disruptions come even faster than in my generation, in the generation, of my parents. And so how do we, make sure that we stay relevant and, adaptable, flexible, etc. So the human capital piece and how businesses, how government, tap on that in view of labor shortage, and how do we look at all of that, is another bucket that I think is really important and I'm very passionate about. The third piece is coming from a philanthropy standpoint. So now I'm working, a lot in philanthropy, and if you look at the spectrum of aging, there are the active aging, and we've talked a lot about people who are 60, 65, 70, these days who are healthy and active and want to be engaged. And all the way to the people who need assisted living, and to the ones that are more needing, sort of elderly care and end-of-life care. Now, to the extent that philanthropies put money into funding for aging, and actually there are not that very many, if you look at the landscape today, they put it to the elderly care and end-of-life, and that's understandable, hospices and nursing homes and daycare centers and so on. But you can hardly find anybody that put it into this bucket, which is actually a very growing bucket, and that involves actually many people in this room, and if it doesn't involve you now, not too long in the near future. And that aging thing is not necessarily 60 or 65, because in some sectors, like Hollywood or financial services, it could be 30, it could be 40. Age is a relative thing. So we should all be thinking about it, and we should all care about it. So
Don mentioned the R word before, retirement, and so kind of picking up on Hiroko's point and yours, Jackie. So if there's this, we have this longevity dividend that is at least available to people who are relatively healthy. We know, Don, from your research, that people are less and less inclined to engage in traditional retirement, which is really a 20th century invention in any event. People want to stay engaged. They want to continue working. This really isn't a commentary on entitlement programs and the like. So what are the impediments? Just very quickly. I mean, again, kind of focusing on this as a survey course. So what are the things standing in the way of our ability to keep people engaged and not have that kind of binary analysis, not have that choice of saying we have a dependency ratio that's inevitable, we have this growing aging population that we'll have to care for. How do we empower people? How do we change the world of employers' policy, et cetera, to keep people engaged for this longer period of life? You have thoughts?
You're going to throw this to me. I mean, I want to come back to Professor Akiyama in a minute, because I think Japan is probably at the forefront of this. But I mean, just in the workplace realm, I mean, there's two. Let me just take it from two perspectives. One is from the workplace side. I mean, national systems that have retirement ages that are very young kind of encourage people to be thinking about a point in time when they're going to change into something else, right? And it's an enforced national deadline. Or companies have company deadlines. And so one of the issues here is sort of, if there is a mandatory retirement age, we need to rethink that, right? And this was raised earlier about, would people support that? Actually, we've just finished sponsoring some research across the Asian region, and we're, as you said, and we've seen some European countries go into demonstrations when the retirement age was changed relatively small.
Yeah, by 2 years.
It's a tiny 2-year change, right? Can we put up slide 9? We just finished the Global Aging Institute, which is run by Dr. Richard Jackson, who is one of the scholars on aging. I think that some people in the room, if you're scholars on aging, probably know him. Just finished a retirement attitude survey across 10 markets in Asia. And one of the questions that was asked, I'm sorry, let me ask you two things here. People should be required to say more. I want to come back to that one. That's slide 9. This call out your slide system is something. Make it slide 8. I'll come back to that. People actually want to be required to save more, but that's another point. Raising the retirement age. Do you think your government, would you support your government or encourage your government to raise the retirement age? And actually, you see a remarkable degree of support. There's one country, the Philippines, where a very small, 20% of the people said yes. But in Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and Korea, a majority of the people said yes, we would support the government raising the retirement age. So there is widespread support for doing this. That's one area I would say. The other thing, Paul, I would come back to is you can't start this. We shouldn't, as societies, as family leaders, begin this discussion about what Jackie was talking about how do I prepare myself for change, right? We shouldn't start that when we're already adults and we first realize our parents are aging. This should start with children. It should start in the education system. And frankly, I won't bore you with other research, but the fact is that if you ask parents, if you ask educators, they widely agree that that's a huge gap in the education system. We don't teach children from the beginning. We teach them all these math and science and everything else, but how to live your life, how to plan your life, how to invest in yourself, how to be healthy, how to think about retirement savings, how to think about money. This is something, a big gap that we should start on much earlier.
By the way, I want to make the point. We have some younger people in the audience. Oftentimes, people think about aging. Jackie kind of made the point about our own experiences on stage. But in the post-human genome project era, in an era in which so much time and effort and expertise is being invested in longevity science, I think in many ways these issues are more important for Generation X, millennials, and the coming Generation Z than they are for boomers or the greatest generation. Depending on whose data you believe, whose projections you believe, we think that life will either get arithmetically longer or geometrically longer, and we're not really sure. We're not really sure which. There's a longevity scientist in Palo Alto who insists that 200 years is just around the corner, but there are other people who say 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years is likely. And obviously, Japan is a relatively healthy country compared to most places in the world, including the United States. So Japan already has a relatively long life compared to others. But the point is that these questions that Jackie's raised about ongoing learning and flexibility, adaptability, et cetera, are likely more important for the 30-somethings in the room today than those points are for the 60-somethings. Hiroko, how has Japan been responding to this question of obviously the demographic circumstances in which it finds itself and these longer lives? Are people working longer? Is immigration policy changing?
No.
Okay.
Okay. First, let me share with you the finding from our panel survey. The slides 11, please. Okay. We are conducting a panel survey and following about 6,000 people. For over 25 years. Okay. We started the first survey in 1987, and we are following the same people every 3 years and asking about the changing of their lives. It was increasing age, and this is one of them in the findings. These are trajectories of independent living. It's based on the ADL and the IADL questions. The functional health questions. Probably many of you must be familiar with this, but the question like, can you walk for a short distance, or can you climb one flight of steps, or can you go to the grocery store, or and also can you take a bus and a train by yourself, not with personal assistance or with some cane or some tools. Okay. And we analyze. We ask the same question every 3 years, and tracing the level of independent living, and this is the trajectory of independent living for Japanese men, and the independent living 3 is, I think, they are healthy and they can live by themselves. Okay, 0 is dead. Okay, and so I'm not going into this, explain all these, the findings, but I want you to pay attention to the red line. About 70% of Japanese men stay healthy until mid-70, about 75, and then start their health declining. Next slide, please. This is for women. About almost 90% of Japanese women, stay healthy until early 70, and then gradually they lose, the health and need some assistance. And go back to the slide 11, please. Okay, and so it's 70% and also 90% of women. So it's 80% of Japanese older people stay healthy until mid-70, and then their health starts declining. And as you remember, in year 2030, 20% of Japanese population will be 75 and older. So this present a tremendous challenge to us. So I think the fact is the real issue is how to move the point. This red line start declining. So now 75 in mid-70, but we can extend 5 more years toward the right direction. So most of the people stay healthy until 80. That's really changed our the future picture. And it's good for themselves, for individuals, because they can live independently, but also for the society. if they stay healthy, they can join the labor force, okay? And also the healthcare, we can control healthcare costs. That's the best policy, I think. Just people stay healthy.
Right.
Okay.
So we often characterize this as health span, the distinction between health span and lifespan.
Right.
And obviously, the closer we get to making health span and lifespan aligned, coextensive,
yes,
the lower the cost for society,
yes,
the better the opportunities for personal productivity.
And also increase the human capital,
right,
resources. Yes.
So I want to give the audience just a couple minutes to ask questions. So let me ask each of you to comment on the following. If I could make you, and I'd love to make all four of you today, the global czars of aging, and each one of you had three wishes, and those three wishes were to change one thing in government policy, one thing in business practice, and one thing in human behavior, individual behavior. What would those three things be? So Jackie, let me start with you.
I would say from an individual standpoint, I think people often talk about government, civil society, and business. I would add to that individual, because we all play a part and we take personal responsibility, for our development, our own development, with help around us from the other three elements. But first, it starts with us, and that basically we integrate into our lives reflection about purpose and how we are always going to be contributing to society and be active for as long as we are able to, and be useful to society. So that would be something that I would want to look at from an individual responsibility standpoint. From a government standpoint, I would say education, education, education. Singapore has just in its financial budget put aside $1 billion a year, every Singaporean in skills future. And it's all about, upgrading yourself, upskilling, constantly educating yourself. Every Singaporean at age 25 and above gets an account of $500 to begin with. And anyone over 40 that goes into relevant programs can get subsidies of up to 90%, and so forth. So education. And then the third one in business, I would say probably leading and owning the conversation around innovation within the business front on how you look at human capital, and deploying and thinking more about how intergenerational teams, which has been proven, intergenerational teams have been proven to give better results. How we look at that kind of integrated human capital and deployment on a continuous basis, as opposed to looking at people working in the conventional way that we think about towards a retirement of a certain age.
Good. Personal responsibility, education, human capital. Andre, let's go to you.
Well, from a policy making, I would tell that my government or the government around the world should stop pushing the problem in front of them. I think it needs to be addressed both from a pension point of view and also from a healthcare point of view. In Canada, as you know, we have universal healthcare coverage, which is great for some people, but it's going to soon represent about 15% of GDP as expenses, and it's totally unsustainable. But nobody wants to address it because of people feel they're entitled to it, and they all think it's going to be the next guy or the next woman's problem. From a business leader point of view, what I would say is that we talk a lot about diversity, diversity in gender, and diversity in ethnicity to come to the best decision-making process possible. I would argue that they now think in diversity in terms of the older people and include them in their thinking. And for individual, I'd say don't rely exclusively on your government for your health care and pension, and stay healthy.
So policy awareness, age diversity is an asset. Personal responsibility, I'm picking up consistent themes. Hiroko?
Okay. Well, at individual level, I think they make best effort to stay healthy and also work. Where we live longer and we work longer. I think that is the title of OECD report in 2005. And that's a probably we should seek. And as it says, education is very important. I mean, we need to, I mean, not only we think about the second life at the age 65, I think we need to prepare them since, I mean, the starting with earlyhood. And for government, I mean, I think, I mean, because, I mean, expansion of, I mean, job opportunity, employment opportunity for seniors essential to maintain, I mean, kind of sustainability of the society. But, I mean, second half of the life, it's kind of like just the second half of the marathon. It's really people are diverse in terms of, I mean, physical state, physical or cognitive abilities, and also the economic and also lifestyle and values and family situation. So I think I'm not, I mean, really raising the mandatory retirement age is not a very good policy, I think. For government, I think I want to create a flexible scheme of employment system. So, I mean, people, all diverse people can join, I mean, the labor force. That is, I mean, the one important, I mean, the request for the government and the business. I think business has abundant opportunities, I mean, to meet the needs of highly aged society. We really, I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, we need to redesign the society and also a person's life, I mean, 50 years to 90 years. And I mean, rather than, I mean, waiting for the people ask what they want, I think, I mean, I want the business to propose the appealing, attractive life design to the people with some products and also services.
Innovation in the longevity economy.
Yes.
Don.
Okay, quickly. From a public perspective, I guess I echo in the same way that Andre said, urgency. Make establishing, for the emerging parts of Asia, make establishing pension systems, insurance systems, an urgent matter. And going just quickly, we didn't get to whether graying and growing are competing. Actually, establishing a strong insurance system, establishing a strong pension system mobilizes domestic capital. And guess how Andre counsels people to invest money, how insurance companies. It's long-term investment. Singapore knows this very well, did this a long time ago. Using the pension system, whether that's public or private, mobilizes capital that would otherwise be in short-term bank deposits into long-term investment in the country and its growth. So I'd say urgency for especially emerging Asia. On business side, making it easier for elderly people to deal with the medical system. Simplify. If you know from your taking care of your elderly parents, I've been through this. For older people to engage, it's extremely complicated. You go into a hospital, it's bewildering. You know, the medical terms, the technology dealing with the system. This is something, it's an opportunity. We provide this, but many companies can get into providing this. This is something to make it easier for people to engage and benefit from the system. That's partly education, but it really gets into helping people. And then the third, for people, my one thing for people, start early, right? If you wait a long time, it's a much bigger mountain to climb. And so people have to save earlier. They have to have a plan, and it should start as early as possible. If you haven't started, start now.
We should all be going home and having these conversations with our kids. Do we have time for a few questions? Somebody who's keeping track of time? A little bit of time? A little bit of time, great. Let's see, sir, back at that table. I think we have mics coming around.
Question. I heard some interesting comments about how social and soft infrastructure have to change. Change to adapt to aging populations. How do you? What's the panel's observations and predictions on how government will alter its taxing infrastructure on a smaller share of working taxable population?
Anybody have Andre?
Well, I'm not sure that tax is the issue. I think it's a broader policy issue. You know, from a pension point of view, people are not making babies anymore. So we're not going to solve the problem by another baby boom. I think there's a number of policy that needs to be put in place. One, you know, of the thing that helped Canada is a fairly liberal immigration policy. I know it's an issue that polarizes the opinion, especially in these days. But I think it needs, one of the instruments that didn't be used to reduce the impact of the reduction in the dependency ratio in the aging population is by having proper immigration policy, by having measures that will favor growth of the women in the workplace, so that, first, they can access to equal pay, and second, they can access to the same opportunity that men have. So those are policy measures that are not directly related to taxes, but increases significantly the pool of working people, and therefore address the issue another way.
Some people speculate that Germany's largesse in the last couple of weeks is actually a human capital play in the face of a shrinking population. Another question? Do we have anyone else? Sir, in the front? Sure. Let's get you a mic, which is coming right now around the photographer.
Thank you. Just talking about longevity, I was just thinking about, as the medical technology advances, we may live much, much longer. But then what's the purpose for the longevity?
Great question.
Should we consume that whether you save their whole life? What about for the people who don't have enough saving?
That's a great question.
Whether if they should live very poor in their longevity?
We should have you come up and join us on I think that is maybe the ultimate question that all of us ask ourselves. Hiroko, do you have an observation about that?
Well, in Japan now, we are not talking about prolonging life. We are focusing more on quality of life. Healthy aging. And I think nobody wants to live at 200 years. Do you?
Well. Look, I think you identify a real challenge, a question that all of us need to be talking about around our dinner tables. It's interesting. A friend of mine in the United States started a project called the Conversation Project, which is a kind of a conversation in a box about death, about preparation for death. But we really haven't had a conversation about getting old and what it means and why we should do it. So I think we all have an opportunity to talk about what we do with this extra period of time, and this can be distilled into maybe two points. One is there is a lot of advocacy and a lot of interest in the notion of extending life, and I think we maybe need to have a more robust discussion about how to improve it.
I think we can both jump in on this one, but I think I want to go back to the conversation. I guess, Jackie, you initiated, which is, this is not just a question about the last 10 years or 20 or 50 years of life. This is a question about what's the purpose of your life right now?
Life course.
Right? And anybody here, right? Do we have a sense of why we're here right now, why we're a valuable person, how we fit into our family, right? And so I think this is not something we're going to legislate or regulate or create. All governments can do or companies can do is to try to create an environment and encourage people to be thoughtful, mindful. Right? There's a lot of discussion of mindfulness these days, right? But to be mindful of purpose much earlier, right? And be thinking about those things. And rather than retirement, you made me think of this, so I'll give Jackie credit for this. Why don't we say revention, right? You got to reinvent yourself. So there are going to be stages in your life, right? But that's a question you should be asking when you're 15 or 25 or 45.
Jackie, you've thought about this.
Yeah, I guess it's, I'm going to paraphrase Kennedy. I think he was the one who said, we have added years to our life, and now we should add life to our years. And, it is very much about living your life at whatever stage, looking at your time as a very valuable resource. And your purpose will change and evolve with each stage of your life, but be reflective and be aware. And you must just try to live, I think we all must just try to live our lives the best that we can for as long as we can, and help others do it as well. And it's not one answer for all of us. We all have to kind of find our own way. and increasingly, hopefully, with awareness. And to me, education is broader than just learning a new skill. It's also education around culture, change, and mindset, because so much of it is really around ageism and mindset and cultural issues and so on. There's an education thing going on, in parts of Asia around replenishing filial piety, as a concept, because that is actually a very good way of, making sure that seniors are taken care of and so on in a broader family sense. And so, looking at concepts in different ways of going through the aging process. Because aging, as you say, is not just the last 10 years. We are all aging by the day. We are already a day older, every one of us.
So our institutions, public and private, need to enable the realization of purpose. And I think, yes. as this gentleman suggested, it's a question that we all have to ask ourselves. I think we need to wrap. We've spent our time, and I want to thank all of our panelists. And please join me in thanking them. And thank all of you.